You're listening to the Grow Landscapers podcast, the podcast where we delve deeper into landscape business, interviewing legends of the UK landscaping industry. So, join host Nick Ruddle as he explores their thoughts, insights and experiences. That's here on the Grow Landscapers podcast.
So, hi and welcome to the Pro Landscapers podcast. I'm Nick Ruddle, and today we're extremely privileged and honoured to be joined by Rob Crowder from the multi-award-winning Crowders Nurseries. So, huge welcome to the show, Rob. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Nick, and thank you for inviting me on. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, I feel like I'm sort of we're joined by nursery royalty. You know, you've been established since 1798. You're the seventh generation Crowder. And my first question is normally, how long have you been in business? But, you know, that is just, you must be one of the oldest companies in the UK, especially in the landscaping industry. Unbelievable.
Yes, there are other nurseries, actually, Nick, that have been around just as long. But no, it's a great privilege. But also there's a kind of weight of responsibility that comes with that. And there's a pressure, and I'm feeling that because I've got three sons, none of whom want to come into the business. They're all doing their own thing. And therefore, there's that kind of responsibility falls on me to say, actually, you know, the business has been going for a long time in the same family, but nothing continues forever. And of course, that might change. And I think it's going to have to.
Yeah, it's funny. You're the seventh generation, you personally, and then you've got three sons, do you say? Three sons and not really carrying on in the Crowder tradition. Maybe onto other things, other interests, I suppose. Maybe they've grown up and, you know, seen you go through the trials and tribulations and thought maybe they don't want to be part of it. But
well, that's
each
also
to their own.
Each their own, and I'm, in a way, I'm very pleased that they didn't feel the burden, if you like, of having to continue, because there is a burden there in a family business and an expectation, and it's something that I was keen that I didn't place on them. But there we go. Maybe we'll come back to that later on in this discussion. There.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you can see from their point of view, you know, there's a bigger pressure on them, I suppose, to make that decision, you know, because they would maybe potentially expected to go into the family business. So yeah, see it from both sides.
Yeah.
So my first question normally is, how long have you been in the industry? I presume that from childhood you were sort of groomed into the company business. So if you just give us a bit of a background on the, you know, a bit more detail of your background, then I think that'll be useful.
Yeah, sure, Nick. So well, obviously I was brought up living in a family home which was opposite what was the nursery. In fact, you know, it's still where the office and the headquarters is today, but it looked very different in those days. And my father took over from his father, who was still around and alive at the time. My father was very much a hands-on nurseryman. And what happened with me was that during the school holidays, I also went away to a boarding school. So when I came home in the school holidays, you know, from quite an early age, I guess age 13 or 14, perhaps, I started working in the business. A, as a way to earn some pocket money, because that's what we had to do in those days. And B, I think, as a way of introducing me to the lifestyle of the nursery industry, to see whether or not it's something that I'd like to go into. So I worked in various different departments, and of course the nursery was very different in those days. As I've said, it was a retail nursery business. It was based in the middle of Lincolnshire. It served the communities of Lincolnshire, particularly the farming families of Lincolnshire. But my father had started to expand the business into the wholesale markets. And this is back in the 1970s. And in those days, the new towns and development corporations were expanding. So places like Peterborough and Milton Keynes and so on, the new towns. And they were buying huge numbers of plants for landscaping. And my father managed to persuade, particularly Peterborough Development Corporation, to buy plants from from our nursery, which at the time was, as I say, very much a parochial nursery, not serving the wider industry. And so that enabled the nursery business to expand. It was a very exciting time for him. And the nursery started to expand very quickly. But then that all changed. And what happened was in 1977, I was aged 21. My father died suddenly and unexpectedly. And I just finished a commercial horticulture diploma at Hadlow College in Kent. Wow. And I was waiting during the summer holidays to go off to a placement in British Columbia, actually, to work on a commercial nursery there, to get some experience and see another country and a different culture. And of course, my father died and that all stopped. And suddenly, at the age of 21, I was faced with taking on the family business. And of course, it's a very young age to do that, Nick. But I had the benefit of youth on my side, and at the time, you believe that you know everything, but in fact, you don't realise that you don't know very much at all. Yeah. But that's the wonderful thing about the naivety of youth, and I kind of blustered my way through it with a lot of help from some good lieutenants that my father had, who were very loyal to the family and very keen to help me make a success of it.
I suppose it's the power of having great people around you, isn't it? I suppose you mentioned about pressure earlier for your children, feeling the pressure and the pressure that's always on you, but the pressure on your shoulders at 21 from the 6 previous generations, that's a hell of a pressure in itself. So I think if you can overcome that and grow the business, that then helps give you belief, going forward, that you can achieve anything, presumably, if you make it a success from such a young age of such a big company.
Yes, and I was very lucky in the late 70s, taking on an early age. It was a time when there was high inflation, high demand for the nursery product, and there were lots of bumps to come along the way. But as I say, the development corporations the demand was huge in those days. And so all UK nurseries were able to expand on the back of that program of development. So it was an exciting time and a lucky time, but that soon came to an abrupt standstill with the Thatcher government, with the market crash in 1987. Another recession followed quickly in the early 1990s, and things all came tumbling down. Massive changes, and of course that's a time of privatization as well, and that's when actually landscape contractors, Nick, and this will be interesting for the discussion, privatization came about. So up until that point, our plant deliveries were made directly to local authorities or development corporations. They had their own direct workforces and they would do all the planting. But the Thatcher government changed that and brought about, privatization and compulsory competitive tendering. And that fueled the expansion of what we now know as the landscape contracting industry.
Wow.
Because all that work had to be put out to competitive tender.
Yeah. Wow. So quite a good thing, really, for the contractors out there.
For the contractors, absolutely. It's quite unsettling for us that we're used to supplying, a few very big buyers to then suddenly have to be change our business model and start supplying lots and lots of individual, much, much smaller contracts.
Yeah, it brings its own challenges, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to ask you now, what did the business look like when you took it over in terms of the people, the land, the amount of people you had, the turnover, all those kind of things? And then I'm going to ask you, what does it look like now, all those years later, 40 odd years later?
Yeah. Okay. So it was a labour intensive business. So I think there were about 25 or 30 people on the books when I took over. But it was very much a retail focused business. So we supplied the needs of the local community, as I've said. So we had a retail nursery outlet. People could come and buy plants directly from the farm gate, as it were. But we also had shops, and we had a shop in Skegness, and we had a shop in the market town of Horncastle. And we even had a guy in a van that went and stood on the local markets in all the market towns in Lincolnshire. and taking orders for roses and shrubs for the garden and apple trees and all these kind of things. And they take orders, and the orders would be kept until it was time to deliver them in the bare root season in the autumn. So completely different to what it is.
Totally different. Yeah.
And phone's going. I'm just going to switch that off.
Okay.
So turnover was something like £250,000. I think we're now doing that in 1 week rather than in 1 year. But of course, there's been massive inflation since then, so that's not a direct comparison.
No.
Very different. And now, what does it look like? Well, we've been through various iterations. We've built a garden centre. We've had garden shops attached to supermarkets. We've had various bits of diversification along the way, but we've got rid of all those now, and we've sold the garden centre, and we're now just a wholesale nursery, totally focused on supplying the landscape and woodland markets. And we've got 50 people, and we're going to be doing £8 million this year. And it's now a very profitable business. It hasn't always been that way because margins have been incredibly tight. And the market's been incredibly competitive. In the last 3 or 4 years, that's changed dramatically. Brexit has helped, but the general greening agenda and climate change is really helping UK nurseries. So I would say that the market's never been better in the whole time that I've been in this business. So it's another exciting time.
There's always bumps in the road, and there's a roller coaster, isn't there, in business? And I think if you've been in business for so long, you would have experienced all the roller coasters, all those pitfalls that you could fall down, and you learn every time from each one of those. Even in that moment of crisis, there's always opportunities, and it helps you to think a different way or make a decision. You mentioned there about you got rid of all the shops and selling to the public and selling off the markets and all that, and just purely focusing in on the industry and supplying wholesale to the industry. And since you have that one focus, I think a lot of people could learn from that, because what I see, and I coach a lot of landscapers, and a lot of landscapers, and sometimes you could be tempted into going off track and think, we'll get into outdoor kitchens, we'll get into this, we'll get into that, we'll start offering swimming pools, or we'll start doing garden rooms, and sometimes if you lose focus of your core business, your core offering, you create a bit of a monster for yourself.
Absolutely, and I've done all of those things, Nick, in my time. So
you failed your way to success.
Because I'm one of these people that I think recognizing your own strengths and weaknesses is a very important stage to get to in your business life. And if you can be honest with yourself, what are your own strengths and weaknesses? And my weakness is my attention span. So I've got a very poor attention span, and I get bored very quickly. And so I'm not a great manager. And that's quite common it's quite a common entrepreneurial trait. And it took me a while to actually recognize that and be honest with myself. And now I'm very open and honest about it. And so I don't involve myself in day-to-day routine because it's not my strength or forte.
I think it's so important for everybody to understand that at whatever position you're in a company, you've got to play everyone to their strengths. And sometimes we try and put round pegs in square holes. And like you say, understanding where your strengths lie, understanding where the business owner's strengths lie, generally not very good at doing the work or managing, but very good, like you say, the entrepreneurial spirit is that, I want to do that, I want to do that, I want to do that. And you get lots of things started, but sometimes not a lot of things finished. And you try and do it all yourself, and it doesn't always work. So having that,
you're absolutely right, Nick. And that's the other thing I recognize about myself. I am a starter I'm not a finisher.
Mm.
And therefore, I need to surround myself with people that have the complementary qualities
It's a
and
team effort.
skills to those that I've got.
Yeah, but they don't have your skills, and you don't have their skills. So recognize that in each other, and it's a dream team, isn't it? But it's the same with any landscape business or your team of people out in the nursery. Yeah. Some people are good at really good things naturally. You need to keep people doing the things that they're naturally good at, they naturally enjoy, because they're going to be more happy, they're going to be happier and more productive for you, and everyone wins. I think sometimes just accepting that, like you say, recognizing that, and then accepting it, and think, okay, if that's who I am naturally, then I need to do more of that, and I need to do less of the other stuff. So no, really,
being honest with yourself and honest with those around you, and then making sure that you add to those skills that you have yourself and fill in the gaps.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So leading on from that, then, what do you think the most successful, the most important elements are to running a successful business? After all your 45 years worth of being, at the helm, what would you say the most important things are?
I think in terms of growing a business, and this is one of the things you asked me to think about, Nick, in terms of growing a business, and it's about having a vision. Because if you can't see ahead, you can't find the road ahead.
Perfect.
In my opinion. So you've got to be able to see where it is you want to get to. And then the road becomes clearer. And that's where I have a strength. But the challenge then is to bring other people along that road. And so you have to articulate that vision and share it with those people and get them to see the way ahead to enable you to go forward. And that's what I would say is really the most important thing in terms of growing a business. You have to know where it is you want to get to.
Yeah, that's so good, and that's so in line with what we preach to our clients, or what we advise to them. Because if you don't know where you're going, how do you know how to get there? If you went on I don't know, you booked a holiday and you didn't know how to get there, and you said, "Come on, kids, we're getting in the car. I don't know how we're getting there, but we're just going to sort of wing it." How many mistakes would you think you'd make? How many times would you go wrong? How costly could that be? It could be exhausting. But getting the right people on the bus and making sure that they're all aligned with, this is where we're going. There's a common goal for everyone in the company.
I think so, but I also think, Nick, that you can't be too prescriptive in that. So you can't define a precise destination.
No.
You can define an area of where you can see yourself and where you would like to be. And you might start off on that road, and then there might be a little bit of a fork in the road at some time to come, which you hadn't anticipated.
Yeah.
And so some people say, well, how can I, define where it is I want to be? But it's I keep coming back to that point about having a vision and in a way, a dream of where you would like to be.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. A nice sort of addition to that is because the further you go out in time, the hazier, the foggier that becomes. So I think you've got to know roughly where that is. But even though if you can't define it, you need to know roughly that's the direction. And then you go, right, if we've got stakes in the ground, we've got key milestones, right? So if we want to be roughly here in 10 years, where do we roughly need to be in 5? Therefore, in 3 years, we can probably guess a bit more accurately what that looks like. And then 12 months, we pretty much know what that milestone is, and then work back to the next 90 days. But you've got to have that vision of roughly where you're going, what direction you're going to go in, what path you want to take.
I think that's really important. But I think people misunderstand that, Nick, to say they think you have to be terribly prescriptive.
It's impossible.
Write down
We don't have a crystal ball, do we?
And I don't believe that. I think that it's just having a vision or a dream, if that's what you want to call it.
Yeah.
And at least you can set off in the right direction and bring people with you.
Yeah, absolutely. The people element is so important. Good stuff. Okay, so look, really good to know where we're going, but sometimes there are bumps in the road. So what are the biggest mistakes that you think you may have made, or the biggest lessons that you've learned?
Yeah, okay. Well, I've made so many mistakes, Nick. We haven't got time to go through all those.
Sail your way to success, Rob. That's what it is.
Yeah. But I think probably the mistakes come from my own personal qualities that I alluded to earlier of, poor attention to detail and short attention span and those kind of things, which means that to keep myself motivated, I always need to be doing something different or going off in a different direction. And the way that came about in my own business was that, I took every opportunity to go into another area, whether it's a different market or a diversification or try something new. And I was constantly starting these new projects or different markets, and it was all, and we could never see them through successfully. A, because we didn't have the resources to do that, and B, because I wasn't the finisher myself. So that's the biggest mistake I've made in business, is trying to do too many things and going off in all sorts of different directions and lacking that focus. And so, we've learned from that. I've personally learned from that. And a part of that learning was recognizing, as I said earlier, my own strengths and weaknesses, because we all have them.
We do, and then it's admitting to them and knowing where they are. So sometimes we may delude ourselves that we're really good at something. Actually, we shouldn't be doing. Someone else will probably be better than us. That's what Richard Branson says. He says, always recruit people that are better than you in those positions, because if you get involved, you actually make things worse. So employ people that are more naturally sort of inclined to do some things. So obviously you've had a few mistakes. That's if you hadn't, then you probably hadn't been pushing hard enough or trying enough and doing enough. But you mentioned about having a vision, and with hindsight, it's always great to look back. And I think this is why it's good to speak to someone like yourself that can really help people to maybe avoid some of those pitfalls that they might have otherwise fallen into had they not listened to the words of wisdom of someone like yourself. But if there was one major challenge or obstacle that you've had, what do you think that might be? And if you just explain what it is, what did you do about it, and what did you learn? What was the outcome? It'd be interesting to find out.
Yeah, well, I have to go back a long way for that one. So the biggest problem we had was back in 1987. So you have to recognize that back in those days, it was a boom and bust economy, and massive growth in the mid 80s. It was just crazy growth, particularly in the property market and the housing market and general commercial property development and speculation. And the business at that time, we were involved in supplying three main markets. We were growing a lot of trees for the commercial forestry market, which was a tax dodge, effectively. It was the forestry investment market. And wealthy individuals were investing in commercial woodlands in Scotland because they were getting massive tax advantages from doing that. So there's a whole industry spawned out of that. And Nigel Lawson stopped that in the budget in 1987. And at the time, I think we were growing 2 million Sitka spruce trees for shipping to Scotland. And overnight, suddenly, there was no market for those trees. We weren't the only ones. There were lots of nurseries in the UK growing conifers for that market in Scotland, and it's just stopped overnight. Now, when you're running a nursery business, you particularly to grow plants like that, there's a kind of 3-year lead-in period. So we got 3 years worth of stock at different stages of production to fulfill that 2 million trees a year demand. And so not only did we lose the sales, the profit on those sales, but we had a load of stock that we had that was then became worthless. That was one part of it. Second part of it, we were supplying the garden centre markets in those days. We don't do much for the garden centre market anymore. That's deliberate. But our niche in the garden centre market was ornamental trees. And we were selling ornamental container grown trees to garden centres. And typically people were when they bought a new home, they would plant a tree or two in their gardens. It's not something that you plant every year in a garden. It's particularly when you move home. Well, the housing market crashed in the early 90s. So that was hot on the heels after the forestry market crash. So we were exposed to that market, and
double whammy.
and it was, and then there was the general recession. So we were, and we'd actually at the time we borrowed a lot of money to build a garden centre in 1983, and then of course interest rates went up. I remember in 1987 interest rates went up to 15% at one point, and then came back down to 10%. It was crazy times. And so we got into a lot of trouble financially. We couldn't service our debts. We lost big chunks of our market. And we got a workforce at that stage that was 80, 90 people. And I had to make 25% of them redundant.
Yeah.
And when you run a business, the toughest part and the hardest job of anybody, particularly if it's your own business, and particularly if it's a family business with long-serving employees that have worked for other generations of your family, to then have to face them and say, I'm sorry, we haven't got a job for you anymore. That's the hardest thing in business. It really is the hardest thing in business. And so that was a very tough time. Tough time for me personally, tough time for the business. And on top of that, we had to refinance the business. The bank wanted to call in their loans. And so, it doesn't get tougher than that when you're in business. Now, that was a long, long time ago, but it's still something I remember very clearly.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that helps you now, doesn't it?
Well, it does. And so I look back on that time and I think, well, how did we get through that? And actually, we made a lot of people redundant. We cut costs in the business. I personally sort of, I did everything I could to show that I was taking part in that. I sold my car and bought a second-hand old banger. I cut my personal salary. We did everything we could to, not only cut costs, but to demonstrate to everybody else that we're all in this together. And that was important. We managed to refinance the business, and we then had several years of consolidation and a long slog and a fight back, and it took a few years to turn it around. It was a tough time.
Very tough time. Yeah, they make you or break you. I suppose it was survival mode, really, wasn't it? Just to get through it and rebuild.
I think, Nick, looking back on that, I think many people would have thrown the towel in at that stage. And I think we were probably technically insolvent.
Yeah.
And probably should have thrown the towel in, or could have easily thrown the towel in, but there's a kind of stubbornness there that said, actually, and also I'm an innate optimist. That's another quality.
Good.
Which
just as well.
Which has strengths and weaknesses to it as well.
It does.
But, I thought, we can get through this. And anyway, luckily we did.
I suppose the added pressure of you being the generation to then, make the business go bust. You think, I don't want it to be me. You're the seventh generation. It hands to you, and you've got pressure on your shoulders to make it work. So I suppose for your own pride and self, respect, you think, no, I need to dig deep here, and there's, we can do it. And that, I think, is an amazing quality to have. That resilience, that resistance, that makes you bulletproof, and the belief in yourself. If you can get through that, you can get through anything. And I think that is such an important trait to have as a business person, because anyone can do well when the times are going well. It's the person you become or have to become in times of crisis that defines you as a business person or not, and makes you really resilient. So you're probably more resilient than most business owners, I would imagine, that you've ever met.
No, I wouldn't wish that. I wouldn't want to wish that on anybody else.
You don't wish it.
Those are the times when you don't sleep at night.
Yeah.
Those are the times when owning a business is not fun. You don't sleep at night, and you feel that weight of responsibility. You also feel responsibility of all those people that you employ and that rely on you for their family's subsistence as well.
Yeah, there's a massive responsibility and a big pressure. And thankfully, you come out the other side, and you're doing really, really well now as a business. And I'm sure your staff are all much happier for it as well. So if you've got someone, let's think, have you got advice for anyone who might be listening to this or watching this, who's a bit stuck in their business, wants to expand, but doesn't really know what to do? They don't know what those next steps are to take. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I probably already touched on this, Nick, when we talked about a vision and having understanding where it is you would like your business, or what you would like your business to be. Some people are incredibly ambitious and want, to continually grow their business, and others have more modest ambitions and want to have a lifestyle business. And again, I think it's being honest with yourself, saying, what is it that I really want?
And communicate.
That's the key to it, is what do I really want? Do I want to keep growing my business forever, or do I want to get to a point where I can have the lifestyle that I want for myself and my family? So that's the starting point, I think. And again, honesty is the best policy here. Being honest with yourself, and then saying, okay, from that, having the vision, recognizing and understanding where it is you're trying to get to is the most important thing. And then it's about building a team around you that enables you to get to where you want to go, because you can't do it
as well, haven't they? They've got to buy into
it. You
it.
can't do it on your own.
No.
And you've got to have the team with complementary skills. And this is my other bit of advice: don't recruit people that are the same as you.
No, absolutely. You want to recruit people that are better than you, don't you?
If I had a business full of people like me, we wouldn't get anywhere, Nick.
You'd start a lot. You might not finish.
We'd start well, yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't really work very well, though, does it? If you don't finish things.
Yeah.
So, look, building a business, bigger does not always mean best and great. I think at some point that's a really important thing to ask yourself. What does the business look like when it's finished? What is it that I go to work for every day? In the words of Michael Gerber, the author of the E-Myth, that's what he says. What does the business look like when it's finished? Then you go about working to build that business. You don't build a house without a plan. So why would you build a business without a plan? So you've got to know what that looks like before you can actually go there. But I think a lot of people in maybe the landscape industry and those kind of trades is they're very good at what they do, but not really understanding about the business strategic side and how to plan, but just love doing what they do. And I think they have to become good at both, because otherwise they don't survive if they don't have the business knowledge as well.
Yeah, that's correct. And I think, I wouldn't want to frighten people off in terms of thinking, I've got to have a plan which absolutely identifies and specifies every step along the way, because life isn't like that. We're entrepreneurs and business people, and even you go to business school and you're told that you've got to have a business plan, and that can put people off. And I would say, don't worry about that too much. That will work itself out if you know where you're going, and that's my big belief.
If you know roughly where you're going.
You've got to know where you're going. And then you'll work it out. You'll work it out how to get there along the way. You can't prescribe every step that you're going to take for the next 5 years. I would discourage people from that, because that's too daunting a prospect. Don't put yourself under too much pressure from day one. I think if you know roughly where you want to go, leave it at that, and don't be too prescriptive in terms of exactly what that looks like. But I think you've got to have a vague understanding of where you want to get to. How big do you want to make this business? Is it going to be a £1 million business? Is it going to be 5? Is it going to be 20? Do you want to take over the world? Do you want to go national? And if the answers to that is actually, no, I just want a nice lifestyle business. I want to have a really tight, close team that makes a nice profit, and everyone's happy. Then that's right for you, isn't it? It's not right for everyone. That's the point. I think that's the most important point: defining what it is that you want from that business. Whether it's you want to grow a huge business to sell for multiples in 15 years time, or whether you just want a lifestyle business with
everyone's different.
Everyone's different.
There's no right or wrong way. Rob, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm going to leave it on that note. I think that's some great wise words, great pearls of wisdom. And if someone wants to get in touch with you, whether it's to come and work for you or to come and use you as a supplier for all their things plant wise and trees, how they get in touch with you? What's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Well, there's our website, which is crowdersnurseries.co.uk, or email inquiries@crowders.co.uk. I should say Crowder is spelled Crowdder. A lot of people think there's a TH in the middle.
A lot of people think it's Leslie Crowther, I suppose,
Exactly.
as opposed to Crowder. Anyway, thanks, Rob. It's been a real pleasure listening to you. Really interesting, fascinating story. Let's hope for many, many more years to come that you're going to keep flying the flag for the Crowder family. So absolutely amazing. Fair play to you. And it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, you too, Nick. Thank you so much.
Cheers, Rob. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye now.
Thanks for listening to the Grow Landscapers podcast. To get in touch and see how we can help you with your business by emailing nick@nickruddle.com.